everyone, we are Ken and Sarah, and we bought an old FedEx van about 7 months ago, temporarily named Rusty Rita, and over the last 7 months we have spent lots of time converting our van, most recently plasti dipping it and adding solar panels and a fan, and today we're going to show you how we added soundproofing and a subfloor to our van. The products used in today's video will be linked below in the description. As with all of our projects so far, the first step is to make sure everything is dry and clean before we add anything. The first thing we added to the van is a material called Kilmat, and it is a sound deadening material that is easy peel and stick. We just peeled it and added it to the smooth areas of the van, and then we use masking tape rolls to press it on. The insulation we will be adding will also help to deaden the sound. We decided to completely cover the wheel wells with Kilmat so we could deaden the road noise since we won't have a lot of insulation around the wheel wells. The next project was to remove the lighting that came in our FedEx van and rewire the other wires that are connected to our backup cam so they wouldn't be in the way for the rest of our build. I slept in today, so Ken and his dad got started on framing our floor, so let me show you a little bit of what happened before I showed up today. Before putting in the subfloor, we decided to cover the seats and power wash the entire floor of the van to make sure it was nice and clean. Framing out our floor took a lot of planning. We used 1x2 furring strips to make the frame so that we could easily place Polyiso foam boards in between. And one thing you want to note is when you go to the store to pick them out, make sure that you get ones that are not bowed so that you can make your floor very, very level. It's also important to attach your furring strips to the top of the ridge and not down in between them. By the time I showed up, we needed to get a nail gun to finish the rest of the project.
Probably. It's left of the vise and the boxes.
We got the nail gun that we were looking for, so now we were backing up the van so that we can use the air compressor to use the nail gun to nail our flooring frame together. A big thank you to my father-in-law for his help and his know-how. We decided to use the nail gun instead of screws because it allowed the frame to come together more quickly, and it also allowed the frame to have some flexibility so that way when we laid it on the floor we could make it very flat onto the van as opposed to having a very rigid frame that would not lay flat against the bottom of the van.
Without wasting the board, I want 32 inches. So what I need you to do is get your pencil. I want these. So 8-foot sheet of plywood is 32, 64, 96. So to cut it in thirds, I won't waste any board.
Save our full board.
So 32. So if you can take your tape measure, take mine. Or give Sarah back her baby tape measure. These are real hands.
This is my crafting tape measure.
Right. So mark them at 32. Got it?
Got it.
Comprende?
Comprende.
So see my theory here is at least they're all going to be straight and at least we glue it, because what Kenny and I found out by taking a few levels around here is that this is not all
Even.
yeah, so
Because of all the ribs in the floor, they're all weirdly spaced.
So now that we got the whole thing nailed together, it was time to get the glue and glue it to the floor. When Ken's stepdad showed up, we took a quick break, and my father-in-law gave some good advice for the fellas that are watching.
I told you this before, you're picking out dresses, we're picking out outfits, we're going out tonight. Which one do you like, this one or this one? This one's my favorite. Duh.
Then it was time to get back to work and glue the framing to the floor. The reason we decided to use glue instead of nails or screws was because anytime you put a hole into the van, it increases the risk of rust, and we had dealt enough with that. We did not want any more issues.
This stuff is thicker than molasses.
We used Sikaflex 221 to attach the framing to the floor, which is why it is so thick. When we ran out of that, instead of going to buy more, we used liquid nails, which worked pretty good. But Sikaflex 221 was highly recommended on the van sites we are members of. After the frame was fully glued, we laid it onto the floor of the van and placed a piece of plywood and some 2x4s down and placed some heavy bags of cement on top so that it would really adhere well to the floor. And then we started the process over in the front by nailing the frame together, gluing it, laying it down, and putting heavy objects on top to help it adhere to the floor. After a quick stop to the Home Depot to get some Polyiso foam boards and then a really quick dance party, it was time for us to remove all the heavy stuff from the inside of the van so that we could start putting in the foam boards into the flooring. And here's the final product of our floor framing. We purposefully made most of the sections 32 inches long so that way when we use the Polyiso foam boards for insulation we wouldn't have to waste any. The width of each section was determined by where we could lay it on a ridge of the flooring. The first step in fitting the Polyiso foam board into the flooring is to cut the board at 32 inches, which is about 1/3 of the board.
So this was the big one you said? This was 32.
Yeah.
Let's test that first.
Nice and snug. The next step in making sure that the foam board fit into each section of the flooring was to measure the width of the section that you're working on and then cut the board to fit that size because each section was sized a little bit differently. After marking the measurement of that width along the board multiple times, we took a straight edge to make sure that the line was very straight and then took a paring knife to cut it along that line. Once we laid the foam boards down, we realized that the glue that we had put in was preventing the board from lying flat. We also found out that cutting foam boards in the van was very messy and had to shot back up all the excess pieces, and we decided to only cut the foam outside of the van. We continued this measuring, cutting, and fitting process until all the sections were filled. So we're debating whether or not we should glue down the foam. We decided to add foam boards in our flooring not only for insulation but also so that when we were standing on the floor and there wasn't anything underneath the plywood, we didn't want it to bow or cause holes, so we added the foam to add rigidity to the floor. This is what our flooring looks like with the frame complete and insulation in place. Polyiso foam is covered with foil on one side, so we added foil tape to the frame to create a solid thermal barrier. Now to add the plywood. We used 1/2-inch plywood as opposed to a 1/4 inch so that it would be more rigid when we stood on it. It wouldn't bow or break easily. We also had to cut the sheet of plywood into smaller sections so that we could fit it through the door of the van. Cutting out the areas for the step and other abnormal areas was not very hard. It just took time to measure each section, draw it onto the plywood, and then cut it out using the jigsaw. Once we got all the plywood sections measured, cut, and laid down and they all fit perfectly, all we had to do is take 3/4 inch screws and screw along the frame to secure the floor in place. It's very important to countersink your screws, otherwise your finished floor will be lifted or bubbled when you lay it down. We were going to add spray foam to the edges of our plywood where it doesn't exactly touch the wall, but you'll see what happens.
I don't think that's how it worked. What's that? Did I give you the right stuff? Yeah, but
Looks like silly string.
it's just such a small gap, I'm not even sure you need foam.
We did try and put it around the entire wall of the van, but because we didn't have very much gap, it didn't work very well. But if you had larger gaps, it would be very helpful. And here is the result of the floor with framing, insulation, and plywood. Well, that's it for today, everyone. Thank you so much for watching, and please subscribe to our channel to see the rest of our van build and for our van adventures.